laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power in the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we will determine to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Abigail Adams to John Adams, March 31st, 1776. It took over 100 years for her words to be heard. In July of 1848, women gathered to express their hopes for equality. 300 people attended the Women's Rights Convention, presided over by James Mott, Lucretia Mott's husband. Women were not allowed to preside over public meetings. The convention produced the Declaration of Sentiments, which was read by Elizabeth Cady Stanton on July 20th, 1848, and signed by 68 women and 32 men. It was molded after the Declaration of Independence. The usurper is he and not the king. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these rights, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Some women were not in favor of the right to vote, which was the 9th resolution of the Declaration of Sentiments. Lucretia Mott was against it. The 9th resolution declared it is the duty of women of this country to secure to themselves their sacred right to the elective franchise. Women organized toward greater rights. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony formed the National Women's Suffrage Association in reaction to the 15th Amendment to work for votes for women and address other issues as divorce and equal pay. Henry Blackwell, Julia Ward Howe, and Lucy Soane supported the 15th Amendment and formed the American Women's Suffrage Association, working exclusively to get women the right to vote. Wyoming was the first state to allow women to vote in 1869. On September 6, 1870, Louisa Ann Gardner Swain was the first woman to cast her ballot in a general election in Laramie, Wyoming. Utah followed in 1870 and Idaho in 1896. On February 18, 1890, the two organizations merged to form the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was president, Susan B. Anthony, vice president. After the passage of the 15th Amendment, Anthony, who was anti-slavery, focused her actions on the enfranchisement of white women. Anthony attempted to vote based on her rights as a citizen under the 14th Amendment. In 1872, and was arrested for doing so. Webster's dictionary defines a citizen as someone entitled to vote. She therefore believed she was entitled to vote. She was recently granted a pardon by President Trump. In Minor versus Happersett, 1875, the Supreme Court ruled that women did not have the right to vote under the 14th Amendment. The fact that women are citizens does not give them the right to vote. Women property owners in the 1860s and 70s held a tax rebellion: no vote, no taxes, echoing the cry of the revolution, no taxation without representation. Working women also organized for the right to vote. Jane Addams and Florence Kelley of Hull House in New York helped form the Women's Trade Union League in 1903, organizing women into trade unions and recruiting women, working class women, into the suffrage movement. The core membership of the League comprised of 20,000 factory, laundry, and garment workers from the Lower East Side in New York City. No one needs all the power of fullest citizenship more urgently than the wage-earning woman, said Florence Kelley in 1898. Lucy Stone started a women's journal in 1870. It was considered the voice of the women's movement. It was purchased by Carrie Chapman Catt in 1970 and served as the official publication of the National American Women's Suffrage Association until 1920, when the organization became the League of Women Voters and continued to be published until 1931. The League was officially founded in Chicago in 1920, just 6 months before the 19th Amendment was ratified, and women won the right to vote. Formed by suffragists of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, the League began as a mighty political experiment designed to help 20 million women carry out their new responsibility as voters. History of the League. Between 1913 and 1920, women intensified their right for suffrage. Women held a large demonstration on March 3rd, 1913. Inez Milhelen Beausevain led the suffrage parade on horseback before Wilson's inauguration. In 1916, before she died, she states, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" This became the rally cry of the suffrage movement. Over 5,000 women marched with 20 floats and 9 bands, and 100 women had to be hospitalized for injuries. States lined up. Some women from southern and eastern states did not want to march with colored women. In 1896, Ida B. Wells Barnett and Mary Church Terrell founded the National Association of Colored Women and helped form the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. These organizations worked to assure that Black women were not forgotten in the fight for women's suffrage. Mary Church Terrell also joined the Silent Sentinels to picket Woodrow Wilson's White House. Alice Paul, who was a radical women's rights activist, was influenced by Emmeline Pankhurst's more aggressive movement in England. She returned from England to the United States with Lucy Burns and found the Congressional Union of Women's Suffrage, later known as the National Women's Party, as a branch of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Her goal was to pressure Wilson to support women's suffrage. They carried petitions to Congress. In 1915, they organized a suffrage booth at the Pan Pacific exhibit in San Francisco. And in 1917, they organized the Silent Sentinels to picket Wilson's White House. 3 women made a cross-country trip carrying a petition with 500,000 signatures asking for women's suffrage. As picketing continued, several picketers were arrested. Paul and others were arrested and jailed for obstructing traffic. The women who were arrested were sent to Occoquan Workhouse. Those arrested went on a hunger strike, and some were force-fed with milk and mush through a tube. Their picket signs showed the contrast between Wilson's view of democracy and his stand against women's rights. While he tells us to fight for liberty abroad, tell him to make America free for democracy. Before he asks the mothers of America to throw their sons to the support of democracy in Europe. Finally, Wilson supported the amendment as a war measure. The 19th Amendment was ratified on August 18, 1920. Tennessee was the last state to ratify. Harry Burns changed his vote after receiving a letter from his mother asking him to vote for suffrage. Warren Harding in 1921 and Calvin Coolidge in 1923 were the first presidents elected with a sizable number of women votes. In 1973, Congresswoman Bella Abzug declared August 26 was Women's Equality Day, celebrating the day Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby certified the 19th Amendment. After the 19th Amendment was passed, Paul wrote the Equal Rights Amendment in 1922 to guarantee equal rights for women and prohibit discrimination based on sex. It was passed by both houses 50 years later in 1972. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. The deadline for ratification was 1979, extended to 1982. After many years, it has returned to state ballots. Nevada ratified the amendment in 2017. Illinois did so in 2018. Both houses of the Virginia legislature, voted to pass the amendment in January of this year, making it the crucial 38th state needed to pass the amendment. In this long process, 5 states have voted to withdraw their ratification. Congress would have to remove the deadline to make these votes valid, and the courts need to decide whether the states have the power to rescind their ratification. When white women began their fight for suffrage, Black men and women were still slaves. The Reconstruction period began in 1865 as the Civil War ended and slaves were free. Frederick Douglass stated, "Slavery is not abolished until the Black man has the ballot." The 14th Amendment gave anyone born in the United States citizenship, and the 15th Amendment of the Constitution stated that citizens' right to vote could not be denied by race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The Reconstruction period after the Civil War lasted from 1865 to 1877. Black men voted and held public office. The Reconstruction Act of 1867 established 5 military districts to enforce the amendment. More than 1,500 Black men held public office in the South. 16 Black Americans served in Congress, and hundreds served in state legislatures and held local offices. Hiram Rhodes Revels was the first African American in the United States Congress. In 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes, a Republican, and Samuel Tilden, a Democrat backed by the Southern Democrats, ran for presidency. Neither candidate had a majority of the electoral votes. Votes from South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana were disputed. Congress set up a bipartisan commission to decide the election. An agreement was reached. Southern Democrats agreed to block Hayes' election if the federal government withdrew its troops from the South. Thus began the Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow era lasted from 1877 to 1965 and beyond. 130,000 Blacks in Alabama registered to vote in 1877. In 1896, 1,342 registered to vote. In 1867, 66.9% of Blacks registered to vote in Mississippi. In 1955, only 4.3 registered to vote. One person, one vote, Carol Anderson. Southern states began to create barriers to voting. This included the grandfather clauses, poll taxes, and literacy tests. The grandfather clause stated you could not vote if your grandfather could not vote. Black men's grandfathers were slaves. Many states' laws required poll tax must be paid before one could vote. The poll tax was cumulative for every year the payment was due, and voters were required to keep receipts to prove they had paid. Poll tax was not outlawed until 1964 with the passage of the 24th Amendment to the Constitution. Literacy tests were required in many states. In early 1940s, after she turned the legal age, Roseannel Eaton, a Black woman, traveled by mule wagon to register to vote in the Franklin County Courthouse. But she found herself before 3 white men who confronted her and tried to stop her. They demanded that she recite the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, a common literacy test used to discourage, block, and turn away Black people from voting. Eaton, unshaken, recited the entire thing. The men conceded and allowed her to register, making Eaton one of the first Black voters in North Carolina since Reconstruction. Private primaries. The Southern Democrats controlled the South until the 1960s. Whoever won the Democratic primary would win the general election. The Democratic primaries were whites only. The Supreme Court ruled in Smith versus Allwright in 1944 against a Texas law that allowed private primaries, stating it was unconstitutional for states to delegate its authority over elections to parties in order to allow discrimination to be practiced. The ruling affected all other states where parties used white primary rule. In August of 1963, thousands marched in Washington to demand civil rights for all. Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. Personal anecdote. I was 16 and working in a summer camp. We left camp on a bus to Washington, along with hundreds of thousands of others. I was standing next to the reflecting pond in front of the Lincoln Memorial when Martin Luther King spoke. John Lewis, who died in July, also inspired the crowd with these words. We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want our freedom now. We are tired of being beaten by policemen. How long can we be patient? August 1963. A children's crusade was organized in 1963 to demand equal rights. Today, several Black Lives Matter demonstrations are being organized by youth. On March 2nd, 1963, Reverend James Luther Bevell organized middle and high school students to skip class and assemble at the 16th Street Baptist Church to march to downtown Birmingham, Alabama, to demand equal rights. As they approached police lines, hundreds were arrested and carried off to jail in paddy wagons. Police dogs and fire hoses were used to stop the children. Thousands of children continued to march despite the violence. On September 15, 1963, the church was bombed by white supremacists and 4 young girls, ages 11 to 14, were killed. In the summer of 1964, over 700 volunteers, oops, I think on one slide, yeah, sorry, missed a slide. In the summer of 1964, over 700 volunteers rode buses to Mississippi to protect the rights of Blacks who tried to vote. They were met with violent resistance from the Ku Klux Klan. While 17,000 Black Mississippians attempted to register to vote that summer, only 1,200 were successful. 3 civil rights volunteers, James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman, were killed while they were participating in Freedom Summer Vote registration in Meridian, Mississippi. John Gower, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights from 1960 to 1967, helped investigate and prosecute crimes related to these killings. He was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama in 2012. On March 7, 1865, John Lewis helped organize a march from Selma to Montgomery across the Edmund Pettus Bridge to demand voting rights for Blacks. This later became known as Bloody Sunday. The marchers were attacked and 50 people were hospitalized. Martin Luther King Jr. led a second march on March 9th to the place of the attack. The marchers knelt and prayed. President Johnson spoke on March 15, 1965, and promised to restore the right to vote to African Americans. On March 21st, 1965, the march from Selma was protected by the National Guard sent by President Lyndon B. Johnson, and 25,000 reached Montgomery. Johnson stated, "It is really all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice, and we shall overcome." I followed the route last summer and saw the changes in Montgomery due to the Equal Rights Initiative led by Brian Stevenson. The Voting Rights Act was passed on August 6, 1965, and was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson. It was renewed in 1970, 1975, and 1982. The act outlawed literacy tests and sent federal representatives to monitor voter registration. 450,000 African Americans registered to vote in 1966. Important sections of the act monitored voting discrimination. Section 2 outlawed vote denial based on race or color, later ethnicity. Section 3 guarantees rights under the 15th Amendment. If the court finds a test or device used to deny voting rights because of race or color, it shall be suspended. Section 4 defines the covered districts as ones that had any type of voting test in place as of November 1st, 1964, and less than 50% turnout in the 1964 presidential election. Pre-clearance was needed in Alabama, Alaska, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Virginia. In addition, certain political subdivisions, usually counties, in 4 other states, Arizona, Hawaii, Idaho, and North Carolina, were covered. In 1975, the Act's special provisions were extended for another 7 years and were broadened to address voting discrimination against members of language minority groups, which are defined as persons who are American Indian, Asian American, Alaskan Natives, or of Spanish heritage. Examiners were appointed by the federal government. the Supreme Court decision in Shelby versus Holder on June 25th, 2013, changed the Voting Rights Act. The decision overturned Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. The court decided that voting discrimination is no longer a serious problem, and it is unconstitutional for the federal government to continue to interfere in state election laws. Section 2 already prohibits discrimination. The formula in Section 4 can no longer be used as a basis for subjecting jurisdictions to pre-clearance. Elizabeth McNamara, president of the League of Women Voters of the United States, reacting to this decision, stated, "Today's U.S. Supreme Court decision erases fundamental protections against racial discrimination in voting that have been effective for more than 40 years. Congress must act quickly to restore the Voting Rights Act." A clear Voting Rights Act is also needed to assure Native American suffrage. The 14th Amendment defines citizenship, but also has an exclusionary clause in the second paragraph. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and immunity of citizens of the United States. Second paragraph. Representatives shall be apportioned among several states according to their respective members, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. American Indian tribes were viewed as sovereign nations. In 1871, the Oregon Federal District Court ruled in McGay versus Campbell that the 14th Amendment did not apply to American Indians because the tribe was an independent political community. In 1884, the Supreme Court ruled in Elk versus Wilkins that the 14th Amendment that granted citizenship to all persons born in the United States did not apply to American Indians. John Elk was an American Indian who gave up his tribal affiliation, moved to Omaha, spoke English, paid taxes, and then tried to vote. John Elk claimed he is a resident of the state of Nebraska, was born in the United States, and was therefore a citizen under the 14th Amendment, and had the right to vote under the 15th Amendment. Charles Watson, the Register of Voters, refused to register him because he was an Indian and not entitled to vote. Justice Horace Gray wrote the majority opinion and stated Elk had not been naturalized as an American citizen. He was born as a subject of an Indian nation that was an alien power. The Dawes Act of 1887 said American Indians could become citizens if they abandoned their tribe and adopted the habits of civilized life, which generally was thought to mean become Christian and speak English. The act was a way to free up Indian tribal lands for white settlement. In 1924, the Indian Enfranchisement Act, or the Snyder Act, gave all American Indians full citizenship. However, states continued to disenfranchise American Indians by enacting laws that excluded those living on reservations from the voting rolls, required that they first terminate their relationship with the tribe, and imposed literacy tests. It took till 1962 for all 50 states to allow American Indians to vote. The National Congress of American Indian launched a campaign in 2004 to register American Indian voters. The Indigenous Democratic Network was formed in 2005 to encourage American Indian to run for office. The Native American Voting Rights Act was introduced to the House of Representatives on March 12, 2019, to end barriers that still prevented Native Americans from voting. The League of Women Voters endorsed the act, stating, Native Americans have unequal opportunities to register to vote because of the absence of in-person registration opportunities on the reservation. Election officials do not accept tribal identification cards under the strict voter ID laws, and they reject registration applications from Native Americans lacking a physical address. Those who are able to register are confronted by great distances to off-registration voting locations, often in places like sheriff's offices, where they do not feel welcome. Our country has made significant progress towards universal suffrage, yet many barriers still exist. It is difficult to get a proper voter ID in several states because ID offices have limited hours or are not accessible by public transportation. States are using gerrymandering to intentionally create districts that favor one party. Ex-felons have been granted the right to vote in most states, yet the Supreme Court ruling in July of this year opens the door for states to charge fees and fines before ex-felons are eligible to vote. Mike Bloomberg has donated $16 million to help felons pay for these costs in Florida. We have definitely made strides over time. The poor Black woman who could not set foot in a polling place in 1958 could pull the lever in 1972. The Spanish-speaking citizen who failed the English language literacy test in 1960 would receive information in Spanish in 1980. The 18-year-old soldier who was sent to Vietnam in 1968 could not vote. They could during the Gulf War. We need to continue to move forward. As President Obama stated in his farewell address, our democracy is threatened whenever we take it for granted. All of us, regardless of party, should be throwing ourselves into the task of rebuilding our democratic institutions. We should be making it easier, not harder, to vote. COVID-19 has changed the way we vote. New York voters can mail in their ballots before October 27th. I hope you did. Residents of Suffolk can drop ballots off at the Board of Elections in Yaphank or early voting sites from October 24th to November 1st. So you have one more day for that. And they can also choose to vote in person at early voting sites or regular voting sites on November 3rd. 3 close early voting sites are Southold Senior Center, the Riverhead Senior Center, and Stony Brook University, Southampton campus. Hopefully more options encourage more people to vote, moving us closer to the ideal of one person, one vote. If you're interested in information on the League of Women Voters, you can go to our website or call 631-324-4637 if you're interested in joining. Thank you very much.
Martha, thank you very, very much. This was informative, certainly very, very timely, interesting, and it sounds like we still have a lot of work to do. So thank you so much. For those people who still want to vote early, I just want to mention the Southold Senior Citizen Center is on Pike Street in Manasuk. And now if anyone has questions for Martha, I think we have a few minutes to take questions.
Yes, Kay?
I have a question. Not so much in our state, but does the League of Women Voters have any interaction with the other states that are trying so hard to limit voting?
Yes, the League of Women Voters is a national organization, and that's one of their main goals is to help voting become, one person, one vote, help voting. So that's what they will work. Each League of Women Voters meets and decides what their priorities are, depending on where you are located. And if you're located in a state with voter suppression, that would be a priority of the League.
And what would they do in order to alleviate that?
What I know of it, they would do information centers. They would go to voting sites. They would inform people of their rights. They would lobby local and state governments they do not support one party over another, but they support every ability to vote.
Fine, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
The last couple, Susan, the last couple of amendments, how long has it taken on average, other than the ERA, to get an amendment passed? So,
well, the 27th Amendment was it was one of Madison's amendments in 1789, and it was passed in 1970.
Oh, God.
So it can, depending on whether they give a deadline or not. The Equal Rights Amendment had deadlines, and that's the problem of that. And that amendment said congressmen cannot vote themselves increases in salary. They could not do that while they were in session. So it's interesting. It can take any different amount of times.
is there any movement going on to either have direct voting for the president, like there is now for Senate, or to require members of the Electoral College to vote the way the state population votes?
Well, that all states require, except for Nebraska and New Hampshire, the Electoral College to vote for the candidate that got the majority of the state. Now the national election movement is trying to, instead of proposing an amendment to the Constitution, what they're trying to do is have states agree that their state electoral college members would vote for the candidate that wins the national vote. And that's been passed by 16 jurisdictions. I think I said that. And that they're hoping to get more. That will make it easier to kind of override the Electoral College as opposed to trying to do an amendment to the Constitution.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have another question, if I may.
Sure.
I think you mentioned that there were 5 states that have withdrawn their approval of the ERA. Could you
That's
tell us
right.
which 5 states they are?
I don't know if I wrote them down or not. I'm not sure. You know what? I'd have to look that up. I don't think I know the names of those 5 states. And at this point, the Supreme Court would have to get involved in that, and that might be difficult at this time.
Okay.
I have a question. Does the League of Women Voters have a position on ranked choice voting in primaries or in elections as opposed to just one vote for one person?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of that.
Do you have does the League of Women Voters have a position on the proposition for ranked choice voting?
Ranked choice voting. I don't know if they do. Susan, do you know if they do right now? I'm not sure. It's I know it's happening in Massachusetts and in many different states, and it's an interesting idea. But you have to look up. You can look up on the League of Women Voters website, and all their positions are there. And I'm not sure whether they have a position on that or not right now.
Oh, I didn't know.
Any other questions? Well,
I have the 5 states.
Oh, what are they? Thank you.
They are Idaho, Kentucky, Nebraska, Tennessee, and South Dakota.
Okay, and interesting.
Susan.
Yeah.
What?
Thank you, I said.
Sure,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They, it's always interesting. Why was Wyoming the first state to allow women the right to vote? Because they desperately wanted women in Wyoming. It was a Western state being settled, and this was a way of attracting women to Wyoming. So they're interesting little tidbits of history.
So now it has to be a Congress in order to roll out the ERA to all the states. Is that
Congress would have to extend the deadline, and the Supreme Court would have to say that you cannot rescind your ratification. So at this point, with Congress and the Supreme Court, at the way they are at the moment, I don't think we'll be seeing that soon. Okay. Well, thank
Martha, we thank you so much.
you. I
you.
enjoyed doing it.
well
I'm
done?
glad my internet came on. I'm glad
We are too.
to do it for you. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I think we're going to do Havdalah.
Okay, then I will leave.
Please
Take care. Bye-bye.
hang on if you'd like.
Okay.
Okay. Barbara, are you there?
We have it
Was-
here.
You are muted, Barbara.
Yes, I'm Jay. Yes, so Kay and Erwin are going to do that for us, and unfortunately, I don't have my laptop. That's why it was last minute. So I don't have the slides.
Oh, gee.
I do.
Ellen has it.
I
Are they on
love,
there?
Kay, I love the candle.
Beautiful.
And are they showing up? Wait a second.
Hi.
Hi. I lost the tooth.
You lost a tooth. And she
Oh,
went trick or treating today.
Nice program.
Very nice.
My
Not a lot of attendance.
my nana came with me, and it's that is my nana.
Very
Ah.
good.
Very good. Yes.
Okay.
There's a lot of history to that. I was so surprised. I started reading it.
Ellen, can we move that up a little bit?
And we, what?
Can
Move
we
it down?
move it up a little?
And I'm trying to get it to be bigger.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to want to do
But
that.
no, not.
You can make it bigger, Kay, if you just increase the space.
Just a minute. Ah,
Move it.
I'm making this bigger.
back to what happened there.
That's Adam.
Need a font.
There you go.
What do you need to do?
Need for a font to make this.
Oh.
Not having much success in changing the size.
Ellen, will it do it if you press the box in the corner over by the X? Will that make it larger or no?
Which box over by the X?
There, up there, yeah. Will that make it larger?
Did it?
No, it made it smaller. I guess it was as large as it is.
I guess so. I've been, let's see. Just trying to interfere here. You,
You could make it larger.
Oh, did you say view on the top, Jay? Did you just say view on the top?
No.
Oh,
zoom to,
zoom to. There you go.
oh,
But she made it smaller.
okay.
There you
There you go.
There we go.
Perseverance.
You are, Ellen, you are the whiz.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Ellen.
let's
You
start
are.
with
Okay, you have that.
wine.
You get to do it twice, okay?
I hope that's given you a chance to get some wine to
Okay,
join in.
and everybody please mute themselves except for Kay.
Okay.
Grace might be it.
Yeah, da 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 da. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pari hagafen borei pari hagafen yai da 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei vesamim borei minei vesamim yai da 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei miorei ha'esh borei miorei ha'esh yai da 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil bein kodesh lechu bein or lechoshech Ben Yisrael ani, ben Yom Hashvi'i, v'sheshek yamei hamaseh, Baruch atah Adonai, hamavdil ben kodesh lechoshech. I don't know. You extinguish what we do this. Hamavdil ben kodesh lecho, katokenu uyimcho, zarenu v'chaspenu yarbekako, v'kakavim ha'eleh. Okay. Shavua Tov? Yes. Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov, Shavua Tov. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, B'mahera b'yameinu, Yavo Aleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David. Miriam Hanvia, Ozim Rabbi Yada, Miriam Tir Koditanu, L'Hagdil Zimrat Olam, Miriam Tir Koditanu, L'Takein et Haolam, B'mhera v'yameinu, Itavienu, El me ha Yeshua. El me ha Yeshua. Sorry for any foul ups.
Say the last word.
Shavua Tov.
Watch out. Have a wonderful week.
Shabbat
Thank
Tov,
So
everyone.
everybody have a good week.
Have a good
Don't-
day.
don't
Please
forget to
stay
vote.
warm.
Yeah,
Yes.
Let's vote off.
And I was gonna, and we don't really have to say to this group, vote.
Vote.
I think you're right, but still.
And let's hope and pray that every day moving forward from election day is one towards a brighter, more peaceful future.
Let us,
That's very well put.
Thank you.
Very good, Barbara.
Barbara,
Thanks very much. I have to go practice my,
you were great. You were great.
my,
You were terrific, Kay.
very,
You
very
did
good.
the thing.
thank you, thank you,
No, very good.
Barbara,
Thank you.
Barbara.
thank you, El.
Good to see everybody. Thanks,
Yes.
Barbara, for coming.
Welcome. Barbara,
Thanks
did you
so
know
much for the
Sheila became
schmooze
a
and learn.
grandma?
That was very interesting.
Sheila came a grandma.
Thank you, Susan. Good job. Our next Schmooze and Learn is November 14th with our own member, Marissa Drago, who's going to be talking to us about how she came out here from Manhattan and how she transitioned from being, I think she was in marketing and also in event planning, to opening up her own business on the North Fork. So
Great.
please, I hope you'll
And
join
doing
us.
so successfully also.
And doing
Yeah.
right.
Wonderful.
Well, it helps to have one of the best biscuits. You know, that doesn't hurt. You know, it's like Alley Cat. We'll have to see about getting her in. She's got the best scones. Oh,
Right.
and I think I had told,
Oh,
What did I tell
fabulous
you?
scones. The best scones in
best
the
scones,
village.
and
True.
Fritz makes, oh, Susan, I think I told you. Fritz makes on Saturday nights, he makes fried chicken dinner that is really, really good. We had it, Susan, I didn't tell you, it's really, really good. So if you're looking not to cook on a Saturday night, if you call them, they'll make you a delicious fried chicken dinner.
And who did you say did this?
Fritz from Alley Cats, her
Oh.
husband.
I keep meaning to go in there.
Where is
You don't have to go in there.
Yeah, their rugelach is great, and if you order it, they'll just bring it to the door.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
Scones. Margot, I get 5 scones at a time and I freeze them.
Well, for our next program committee meeting that is coming up, I'd like to order some scones.
You got, I got them. They're on me. I owe you for the
Do you
last.
have to be
Okay.
on the program committee to come to that meeting?
No. You just have to like
You
scones.
come with ideas,
right.
yes. And one more announcement, next Friday. Yeah, next Friday we have a Kristallnacht service.
Right.
Right.
With,
Send me the website.
I'm going to send out the information probably tomorrow.
Very good.
Send me the
Okay.
website.
And you should have read in the newsletter, please save the date, December 13th. We're going to be having our Hanukkah celebration. And we're going to start with, I'll go out on the village green, and if we're able to do it, the kids will join us. We'll light the community menorah. If we're able to, I'm going to try to see if I can get the schoolhouse for us to go into, just for the small group, but everything else is going to be doing virtually, and we'll all be able to join. Alana is going to be leading us in song and prayers, and
Virtually.
a friend who is an actress, and she's going to be doing storytelling for us. And I'm hoping everybody's going to bring their latkes and their dreidels and their gelt and their family, and invite them to join us. And we'll have one big North Fork family, North Fork Reform Synagogue Hanukkah celebration.
But
Okay.
this is
Wait.
via Zoom, right, Barbara?
Yes, via-
Okay,
You're gonna
I'll
put
be
out
there.
a table?
I'm sorry?
Are you gonna put out a table by the village green? A table? No?
Not, well, no, not a table.
Zoom.
Where we'll light the menorah.
Right.
And if we're able to get together, if the children's families are comfortable with doing that, I'm going to try to get the schoolhouse for us to go into.
Good.
And if that doesn't work out and we go back to the synagogue and just be socially distanced,
Yeah.
just be that group that will be at the synagogue. Everything is gonna be via Zoom though.
Susan,
Can you figure out how to do
website.
Ellen,
lots?
I'll have to talk to you about
send
that.
me the website, Susan.
But that's in December, so next month. Oh,
Good,
we are-
great.
Susan,
Yes,
send me the website.
I will.
I'll see you next week for the meeting.
Wonderful. Bye-bye.
All
Bye.
right.
Hi, Barbara.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
So nice
You're
to
welcome,
meet you.
Everybody. Bye.
Barbara,
This was
Sheila
lovely.
became a grandma.
Bye, honey.